Welcome to Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. On the Snoozecast, we read excerpts from public domain works and occasionally original stories. We'd like to thank our listeners. If you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe, and also share it with a friend. The best place to listen to us is on our website, snoozecast.com. From there, you'll be able to download or play single episodes without having to change any autoplay settings on your device or in your podcast directory. This episode is supported by all the hardworking houseplants out there. While L. Frank Baum is best known for the 14 novels in the Wonderful Wizard of Oz series, the prolific children's author explored other fantastical worlds. The Sea Fairies is a magical underwater fantasy following Mary Griffiths, nicknamed Trot, or once in a while Tiny Trot, as she fulfills her wish of seeing a mermaid for the first time. Her adventure is filled with a journey through an underwater kingdom where she meets kings, queens, and villains along the way. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. Chapter 1. Trot and Captain Bill. Nobody, said Captain Bill solemnly, ever saw a mermaid and lived to tell the tale. Why not? Asked Trot, looking earnestly up into the old sailor's face. They were seated on a bench built around a giant acacia tree that grew just at the edge of the bluff. Below them rolled the blue waves of the Great Pacific. A little way behind them was the house, a neat frame cottage painted white and surrounded by huge eucalyptus and pepper trees. Still farther behind that, a quarter of a mile distant but built upon a bend of the coast, was the village, overlooking a pretty bay. Captain Bill and Trot came often to this tree to sit and watch the ocean below them. The sailor man had one meat leg and one hickory leg, and he often said the wooden one was the best of the two. Once Captain Bill had commanded and owned the Anemone, a trading schooner that plied along the coast, and in those days Charlie Griffiths, who was Trot's father, had been the captain's mate. But ever since Captain Bill's accident, when he lost his leg, Charlie Griffiths had been the captain of the little schooner while his old master lived peacefully ashore with the Griffiths family. This was about the time Trot was born, and the old sailor became very fond of the baby girl. Her real name was Mary, but when she grew big enough to walk, she took so many busy little steps every day that both her mother and Captain Bill nicknamed her Trot, and so she was thereafter mostly called. It was the old sailor who taught the child to love the sea, to love it almost as much as he and her father did, and these two, who represented the beginning and the end of life, became firm friends and constant companions. "Why hasn't anybody seen a mermaid and lived?" asked Trot again. "'Cause mermaids is fairies and ain't meant to be seen by us mortal folk," replied Captain Bill. "But if anyone happens to see 'em, what then, Captain?" "Then," he answered, slowly wagging his head, "the mermaids give 'em a smile and a wink, and they dive into the water and gets drowned. Suppose they knew how to swim, Captain Bill. That don't make any difference, Trot. The mermaids live deep down, and the poor mortals never come up again. The little girl was thoughtful for a moment. But why do folks dive in the water when the mermaids smile and wink? She asked. Mermaids, he said gravely, is the most beautiful creatures in the world. Or the water, either. You know what they're like, Trot. They's got a lovely lady's form down to the waist, and then the other half of 'em's a fish, with green and purple and pink scales all down it. Have they got arms, Cap'n Bill? Course, Trot. Arms like any other lady, and pretty faces that smile and look mighty sweet and fetchin'. Their hair is long and soft and silky, and floats all around 'em in the water. When they comes up atop the waves, they wring the water out of their hair and sing songs that go right to your heart. If anybody is unlucky enough to be round just then, the beauty of the mermaids and their sweet songs charm 'em like magic. So as they plunge into the waves to get to the mermaids. But the mermaids haven't any hearts, Trot, no more than a fish has. So they laughs when the poor people drown and don't care a fig. That's why I says, and I says it's true, that nobody never saw a mermaid and lived to tell the tale. Nobody? Asked Trot. Nobody at all. Then how do you know, Cap'n Bill? Asked the little girl, looking up into his face with big, round eyes. Cap'n Bill coughed. Then he tried to sneeze, to gain time. Then he took out his red cotton handkerchief and wiped his bald head with it, rubbing hard so as to make him think clearer. Look, Trot, ain't that a brig out there? He inquired, pointing to a sail far out in the sea. How does anybody know about mermaids if those who have seen them never live to tell about them? She asked again. Know what about 'em, Trot? About their green and pink scales, and pretty songs, and wet hair. They don't know, I guess, but mermaids just naturally has to be like that, or they wouldn't be mermaids. She thought this over. Somebody must have lived, Captain Bill, she declared positively. Other fairies have been seen by mortals. Why not mermaids? Perhaps they have, Trot. Perhaps they have, he answered musingly. I'm telling you as it was told to me, but I never stopped to inquire into the matter so close before. Seems like folks wouldn't know so much about mermaids if they hadn't seen 'em, and yet, according to all accounts, the victim is bound to get drowned. Perhaps, suggested Trot softly, someone found a photograph of one of them. That might have been, Trot. That might have been, answered Captain Bill. A nice man was Cap'n Bill, and Trot knew he always liked to explain everything so she could fully understand it. The aged sailor was not a very tall man, and some people might have called him chubby, or even fat. He wore a blue sailor shirt with white anchors worked on the corners of the broad, square collar, and his blue trousers were very wide at the bottom. He always wore one trouser leg over his wooden limb, and sometimes it would flutter in the wind like a flag because it was so wide and the wooden leg so slender. His rough kersey coat was a pea jacket and came down to his waistline. In the big pockets of his jacket, He kept a wonderful jackknife, and his pipe and tobacco, and many bits of string, and matches, and keys, and lots of other things. Whenever Captain Bill thrust a chubby hand into one of his pockets, Trot watched him with breathless interest, for she never knew what he was going to pull out. The old sailor's face was brown as a berry. He had a fringe of hair around the back of his head and a fringe of whisker around the edge of his face, running from ear to ear and underneath his chin. His eyes were light blue and kind in expression. His nose was big and broad, and his few teeth were not strong enough to crack nuts with. Trot liked Captain Bill and had a great deal of confidence in his wisdom and a great admiration for his ability to make tops and whistles and toys with that marvelous jackknife of his. In the village were many boys and girls of her own age, but she never had as much fun playing with them as she had wandering by the sea, accompanied by the old sailor and listening to his fascinating stories. She knew all about the Flying Dutchman and Davy Jones's locker and Captain Kidd, and how to harpoon a whale or dodge an iceberg or lasso a seal. Captain Bill had been everywhere in the world, almost, on his many voyages. He had been wrecked on desert islands like Robinson Crusoe and been attacked by cannibals and had a host of other exciting adventures. So he was a delightful comrade for the little girl, and whatever Captain Bill knew, Trot was sure to know in time. "How do the mermaids live?" she asked. "Are they in caves? Or just in the water like fishes? Or how?" "Can't say, Trot," he replied. "I've asked divers about that, but none of 'em ever run across a mermaid's nest yet, as I've heard of." "If they're fairies," she said, "their homes must be very pretty." "Maybe so, Trot, but damp. They are sure to be damp, you know." "I'd like to see a mermaid, Captain Bill," said the child earnestly. "What, and get drowned?" he exclaimed. "No, and live to tell the tale. If they're beautiful and laughing and sweet, there can't be much harm in them, I'm sure." "Mermaids is mermaids," remarked Captain Bill in his most solemn voice. "It wouldn't do us any good to mix up with them, Trot." "Mary, Mary," called a voice from the house. "Yes, Mama. You and Captain Bill come in to supper." Chapter 2. The Mermaids. The next morning, as soon as Trot had helped wipe the breakfast dishes and put them away in the cupboard, the little girl and Captain Bill started out toward the bluff. The air was soft and warm, and the sun turned the edges of the waves into sparkling diamonds. Across the bay, the last of the fisher boats was speeding away out to sea. For well the fishermen knew this was an ideal day to catch rock bass, barracuda, and yellowtail. The old man and the young girl stood on the bluff and watched all this with interest. Here was their world. "It isn't a bit rough this morning. Let's have a boat ride, Captain Bill," said the child. "Suits me to a T," declared the sailor. So they found the winding path that led down the face of the cliff to the narrow beach below and cautiously began the descent. Trot never minded the steep path or the loose rocks at all. But Captain Bill's wooden leg was not so useful on a downgrade as on a level, and he had to be careful not to slip and take a tumble. But by and by, they reached the stands and walked to a spot just beneath the big acacia tree that grew on the bluff. Halfway to the top of the cliff hung suspended a little shed-like structure that sheltered Trot's rowboat, for it was necessary to pull the boat out of reach of the waves, which beat in fury against the rocks at high tide. About as high up as Captain Bill could reach was an iron ring securely fastened to the cliff, and to this ring was tied a rope. The old sailor unfastened the knot and began paying out the rope, and the rowboat came out of its shed and glided slowly downward to the beach. It hung on a pair of davits and was lowered just as a boat is lowered from a ship's side. When it reached the sands, the sailor unhooked the ropes and pushed the boat to the water's edge. It was a pretty little craft, light and strong, and Captain Bill knew how to sail it or row it, as Trot might desire. Today, they decided to row. So the girl climbed into the bow, and her companion stuck his wooden leg into the water's edge so he wouldn't get his foot wet, and pushed off the little boat as he climbed aboard. Then he seized the oars and began gently paddling. "Whither away, Commodore Trot?" he asked gaily. "I don't care, Captain. It's just fun enough to be on the water," she answered, trailing one hand overboard. So he rowed around by the north promontory where the great caves were, and much as they were enjoying the ride, they soon began to feel the heat of the sun. "That's Dead Man's Cave, 'cause a skeleton was found there," observed the child, as they passed a dark, yawning mouth in the cliff. "And that's Bumble Cave, 'cause the bumblebees make nests in the top of it. And here's Smuggler's Cave, 'cause the smugglers used to hide things in it." She knew all the caves well, and so did Captain Bill. Many of them opened just at the water's edge, and it was possible to row their boat far into their dusky depths.